Ashton Kutcher and
Well, don't we love Zoom? Okay.
recording in progress.
Yes.
So it's always an adventure. And I got to work with these people, and I'm lucky to have gotten to work with them, not because of them, but because of the audience that watched their content. You know, that's what made MTV so magical was the audience that was connected to back then. But I saw that in shows in the Newlyweds, Osbournes, I can go on and on. I cast Housewives of New Jersey, Millionaire Matchmaker, many shows
Sure.
that in reality, many of us ask for do-overs. Many of us say sorry. Many of us change. And reality TV, you know, is amplified when people see it. You know, there's lots of shows that I recorded that no one saw. So the impact of change didn't happen because the visibility wasn't there, right? With great visibility comes change and the opportunity for discovery, for these shareable moments. And I think, to be honest, I look at the positive side of things. I don't know, maybe part defense mechanism from a kid, you know, super what we coping mechanism turned superpower, you know. I didn't have a lot of control over, like most kids, you know, of their kid years, parents do, and mine were divorced or in and out of rehab, and it was, and a lot of times, you know, felt very, not to say lonely. I have the oldest of four, you know, siblings at that point in my life, and I had plenty of people to deflect to, put their goals
Sure.
ahead, you know, learn to not want anything for myself so I can minimize, you know, risk of loss or disappointment, so I can, you know, make it. But that's where I secretly tapped into the law of attraction. That's where I secretly realized I don't even need to want things. I don't know. I don't want to get too heady about this, but I don't
It's
even need to
okay.
I don't need to take direct action to get what I directly know I directly want. And I didn't mean to take the scenic route, and I didn't think it would lead me to a place where I would be so rewarded and I would feel so happy, confident, self-confident in myself. So, by the way, so much so that for me, you know, individuality really matters. I built a career on helping individuals and individual businesses stand out, by the way. My father's name is Vinnie Potestivo. I'm Vinnie Potestivo. When I got to college, I changed the spelling of my first name to Vinnie with an IE, because it's sort of a nod to the feminine, you know, words in French and Italian. And for me, in the late 90s, at a point in time where I had no rights that I have now, at work or at home
Yeah.
or with family, you know, I had to make, you know, choices. And for me, building the space for me to be confident in who I am was part of that in my freshman year of college, when I changed the spelling of my first name from Vinny with a Y to Vinny with an IE. And my friends were like, "What are you doing?" Like, you know, like, this is something you would see on Real World. Like, people on Real World would change their spelling of their name, make it kind of
Right.
cool. I was like, no, I'm making space for me. But I didn't know that then. I didn't quite understand what it was. But I didn't matter. I felt called to take inspired action. I felt called to help people create web pages, because I knew how to make web pages, or scan photos into the internet so you can have profile photos, or take your DVDs and get them scanned onto your iTunes. Like, I felt propelled to help people, and all of that in college, all of that serving and seeking validation through helping other people turned into exactly what I did at MTV, which was, you know, to organize a process and to make sure that people were creatively high functioning creatives were supported in a high functioning way. And I was able to change databases and sheets, and a guy that went around, you know, showing people what their address book in Microsoft was for, and why they, you know, like, why we should not be using the role. I had 2 Rolodexes. I actually had a Rolodex for celebrities, and then a Rolodex for, like, manager. It was the weirdest way to organize
Right.
things. It was really cool, you know. So you start thinking of how we were organizing back then. And I'm doing the same thing now. I have a podcast. It's called I Have a Podcast. I go back and I talk to Mandy Moore and Christina Milian, Jamie Lynn Sigler. There's lots of awesome people I've talked with. I hope to talk to Diane von Furstenberg, Beyonce, Nick Cannon. I mean, people whose careers have changed mine.
Sure.
And I've a small part in theirs. But I have a podcast.com as a database for podcasters, as guests and as hosts. I really like helping people stand out. I like building a space for podcasters specifically, not their podcasts, but podcasters. And podcasters also, I call it, I have a podcast because as a kid, I would go to Al-Anon and Alateen, and I would hear, hi, I'm so-and-so, and I'm an alcoholic. And I would understand that I would understand a person had a certain skill set. I can give them 12 steps, and this would be a way that I can relate to them on a high functioning level. And I kind of gave me the right tools to work with them. So I like this idea of I have a podcast, because podcasters, man, we are responsible and curious and methodical and hopefully organized enough to either be well organized or find someone who is well organized. We are people dependent, not tool dependent. It is about the who, not the how. This industry is growing, but it's at our pace. People say, "Oh, there's so many podcasts. Are you afraid of launching a podcast? What? Are you afraid? Who's saying that? The TV executives that are afraid we're going to take away hours of their programming time and they're going to lose more money? By the way, who's saying that? How many films? How many books? How many networks? By the way, you're afraid of podcasts. I can name more places to put my podcast now this year than I could, new podcasts. It's a powerful time for us to own intellectual property. Our word, our likeness is a really cool time. And I'm here to empower personal brands, founder-led businesses, small businesses that are can help creatively communicate through content and through media.
And the interesting thing is, back in the 60s when I went to college, I wanted to be in broadcasting. And my parents looked at me and they said, no woman is ever going to make it. So you're going to go to school and you're going to get your teaching certificate and, stop dreaming about something that will never happen. And so I didn't tell them what courses I was taking for the first 2 years, and they were all communication and broadcasting. And luckily, I actually got my associate's degree. But when my parents found out about that, they were horrified. I had just wasted 2 years of college, according to them, and their money. But I had a vision even back then. And my vision was, I want to do better. And for me to do better, I have to learn about you and all the other people that I'm, intermingling with. Because number one, I have to know how to communicate with you. We communicate with each person differently. And if I decided I was going to, have a conversation with you the same way that I have with my son or my husband, it's not going to come out right. There's going to be words or euphemisms that I use that people are going to go, Karen, that was not right. But it took me almost 40 more years until I got my master's and woke up one day and said, okay, I'm going to do this. And I'm not doing it to become famous. I'm not doing it to make, oodles of money, because for those of you listening, there's a handful of podcasters out there who are making a really good living on just podcasting. The rest of us are doing other things with our podcasting. And what makes me feel good at the end of the day is when I learn something from my guest, and somewhere along the line, somebody who has listened to the podcast will thank me for the podcast. They will point out, hey, I learned this from Vinnie. I learned this from you. And it's like, hey, we touched somebody. And that's what positivity is about. It's not to sit here and say, I don't like Vinnie because he changed the spelling of his name. It's like, okay, but what do you like about Vinnie? That's where we need to go. And I think if we did that, we'd have less trouble in our country right now.
Yeah. Well, that being said, I think I learned somewhere as a kid, maybe this is a great convo. I would never focus on what I don't like in somebody, because I think the first question, the first thing of logic, the first message I'm getting in my head is like, well, what does that say about you? And I think that I'm more likely to accept that I just focus on the positive than have to address that deadly question, which is, what does it say about you? Oh, I don't like him because he's a little bit, loud and boisterous. What does that say about you? And I would think, oh, I'm insecure about my voice, and this is all about me, and this, it's like that. So for me, so coping mechanisms, certain superpowers. There's part of that's built in that way for me. I think I'm aware. I was brought up very aware of my actions and of adult actions too. Like, I was taught as a child that adults, might say one thing and do something else, and that they don't mean harm, but there might be harm, and there might be or uncomfortable things that might happen, and what addiction and drugs do to the body and to the brain, and understanding how drugs can change the way someone's brain connects. It took me to be honest, I understood the science that I was told as a kid. It took me into my 20s or 30s, into a deep relationship with my parents, that I understood finally what effects that really, really, has, mostly. And what does that say about mostly? Because I just didn't want to accept the things that I was seeing. I
Right.
didn't want the reality. Sort of, I wanted to have a do-over, by the way. Some things you can't have do-overs on. I want to make sure, we point that out. But I think that also, I had a conversation with Mandy Moore about, like, sort of like work-life balance in my podcast. She talked about taking things off, like just removing the pressure from yourself. How, like, when she was 15, being on MTV, on live TV with the microphone and an audience and hundreds of people screaming and dozens of producers around and everyone looking at her, and live, it felt like the world was on her shoulders. I remember her saying. And versus This Is Us, where she's like, I'm like 1/300th of the equation, Vin. Like, you have no understanding what it's like to walk to a film set with that many people who are functioning that level of expertise, and we take it step by step. And how could I not be successful with all the people I'm surrounded by, and then me, because I'm like the big brother nudge. I'm like, well, then how come you never directed an episode? And she's like, well, you know what? You're right. Maybe I should. And we had this great conversation right before she was filming the last season of This Is Us, and she went on to direct an episode, which is super cool. Growth. It's about growth and inspiration. She talked about the power of outsourcing. Just taking pressure off yourself, having a system to give ideas to having, a therapist in place to bounce ideas and conversations, and transparent, having deep conversations with, putting those systems in place the same way you would if you were an athlete, or an Olympian, and you needed, training, the same way us creatives needed. She talked about how the input dictates the output, and this is something I think helps me keep a positive mindset. I'm very realistic. I watch the news. um, I'm aware of the things that are, devastating. I don't scroll on social media. I go to social media, and there are a couple of places I specifically go, but I won't scroll. I won't give myself it took a really long time for me to learn to not
Yeah.
scroll. But so I'm now control. I now feel like in control enough to go to social media and not find myself 7 minutes into a scroll on Instagram and be like, oh no, they got me again. It takes a long time to get there. It takes a lot of self-confidence. It takes a lot of goal setting, to be
Right.
really honest. Mindfulness. That it's a very it's crazy to think about some of the things that help me with have keep and maintain a positive mindset. Also, I'm a communicator. Levity, jokes, humor are a great way to keep a story alive. Many stories are shared specifically for the punchlines, but we're willing to go through the journey to get to the punchline. And fairy tales are built that way, and hero stories are built that way. characters stand the test of time. I think that that's and also my podcast. I have a podcast. It's weird to say this. It's almost you know how some people use podcasting as like networking. It's almost like my gratitude journal. So
Yep.
weird to say. It's like so embarrassing, but like I get my best friends on my podcast, and I'm like, oh, I'm just like I can just give you 1,000 things I'm grateful for. It almost makes me cry right now thinking about like how the two of us of all people in this entire universe, there we were, and that's what we did, and millions of people saw that, and um, I was lucky. I compared myself to my father, and in my freshman year of college, I felt like I overcame that obstacle, but I made it a choice to make sure that I couldn't be compared. I avoid comparisons at all costs. For a decade, no one understood when I said I work in reality television and I'm a talent executive, and I develop careers based on media access, and I help people take their stories and turn it into radio shows, podcasts, broadcast, film. It's about owning your story, understanding your audience, and getting it out there. Those are the things, and collaborating, and the work. I got to do work. I had to surround myself with people who have high output content creators. That's positive output is because of results, not because of anything that I said earlier. No, none of those actions matter if there's nothing being created and generated, and there are no actual results. And I had to surround myself with people. So for me, I thought casting would be a nice way in, because then you meet the people, and if I'm good at befriending people, then maybe they'll trust me, and then maybe we can work. And I know what my limits are, but I'm also a great networker. So I can get a technical executive producer and a digital composer and whatever we need. I can
Sure.
find it. I can find it. You know what I mean? Even without the resources of MTV, I felt that way, which is what started my whole career in college. One day, I just was fed up. I wanted to be a casting director, so I took out an ad, and I said, if you want to be submitted for projects, send me your
You know,
headshots, and I'm looking
and
for stuff, and it worked
and
out.
I love hearing you say that you knew what you wanted to be and you went for it. Okay. Where so many are to this day still sit around saying, it's never going to happen to me. It's just never going to happen. And I'm going to give an example. And I don't think my son will be too upset with me if I say this. His love since he was 2.5 years old was baseball. His whole life, he talked about playing for the majors. He's also on the autism spectrum, but at the high end. So when he played baseball, even t-ball, he knew the rules in the majors, and he wanted to play by those rules. And when they didn't let him, they said, no, go try to hit it again. Okay, come back and run a little bit faster. It was like, no, I'm out, that's it. So he grew up wanting to be in baseball. He knew that he wasn't going to play baseball because his brain just went in a different direction. And so he thought for years, what is it he wants to do? So he started working for a major league team, was with them for 5 years, and there was just like no place to go yet. And it was like, I can't stay here. I got to keep looking. And he spent the last summer into November looking for a job. He's still working with a sports team. He moved away. But what I see in him is he still says, I'm going to be back in baseball someday. But you know what? I'm going to learn here. I'm going to network here. I'm going to take this. And he's not afraid of disappointment. He used to be, but he's not now, because he says, I took the biggest step I had to take. I
Well, it's confidence
walked
now,
away
right?
from where I wanted to be.
Yeah, he has
And that's what
confidence.
I hear you saying too, that you find your place and you do what you need to do.
It's so funny to think of this. 25 years ago, what I wanted to do for a living was help people be better versions of themselves and make make content that people enjoy. You know how many people understood what I was trying to do then? Ugats,
Yeah.
a whole lot of nada.
Yeah.
You know how many people do that job today? Millions
Right.
of people do that job now. My title is the same title as most HR executives, and the collaborators that I've worked with are now the same titles as. It's just it's exponential. It's exponential when you focus on the skills that you have. Also, and I think I share this with your son. Uh, like when I got to MTV, I knew I wanted to be there because of who was in there and what they were doing. That was important to me. And a lot of times things will happen to us that affect our story, and our stories can take us to places where our characters shouldn't be, to be honest. Other people wanting us to do things, finding value in us, and all the things that serve other people. That if you're not self-confident, you're not grounded, if you aren't focused, if you aren't good at setting attainable goals, these are things that help you be positive. By the way, you
Yeah.
want to talk about let me tell you what I mean by attainable goals. For January 2 years ago, I was like, all I need to do is go back to the gym, and I had it downstairs. I lived in Brooklyn, and this place where I had it in my building, and I said, you know what? I'm just gonna go for a minute the first day, and then tomorrow 2 minutes. It's not even about the exercise. It's about getting dressed and going downstairs and doing it. And then I had this epiphany that I want to lose some weight, and I said, but I'm not. I'm careful about stress. I'm very scared about setting unrealistic goals and not meeting them. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just be a pound healthier from where I was a year ago, not yesterday. I'm not going to compare myself to who I am now. That's not fair to me. But a year ago, Vinny, Vin, thanks for setting me up with that that extra bag of donuts on that day. So today is a water day and a juice day, and I get to really detox and cleanse, because a year ago I was in a dark place, and I don't ever want to let me get back there again. I also track everything. If I can, I track my sleeping, I track my weight, I track my breathing on all these apps. I love it. It helps me. It helps me be present without having to be obsessive. I could obsess over my list of things that, if I, as I'm giving you the the list of things that I do to stay positive, that sounds overwhelming, but it's just the way that the pen strokes, for me. Mindfulness is, gratitude. These are things that you work hard to be able to use those words and lean into them.
Well, and it
Yeah.
sounds like all these things that you do, they've become natural. Yes, when you talk to me about it, it's a list, which is overwhelming. In fact, I wrote a blog on this yesterday, that we look at time and we're always saying, I don't have enough time for these things. And yet
Hmm.
most of us do. And
Yeah.
if you make it something natural for
Yeah.
yourself, it tends to work. I'm not one to make a
Flow.
resolution at the
Flow.
first of the year.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with you.
Um, and I love how you said you didn't want to compare yourself to yesterday. You had to go back further, because yesterday could have been a fluke. It was one day.
Yeah.
But now you're going back a year and you're going, that's where I was. And what was I doing? And wow, is that positive or not? And when you look at it and you say it's not positive, okay, what's the one thing I can do today
Yeah.
that will make that change?
And sometimes it's today, this month. That might look like applying for a certain award, because awards are annual. So maybe I want to be seen as an award-winning something. So I do research to make sure that I understand what awards would help me stand out and help me, exemplify my expertise in that category or that area. That's a fun thing. 25 years later, I finally won my first Emmy last year, because I realized that I never applied. And when I realized the number one reason why I don't have an Emmy, actually number two, number one reason is because they didn't give Emmys away to casting directors when I was doing what I was doing. But anyway, so what the game was but they did to producers. So casting directors wanted to be producers, and what a weird, gnarly journey to need to be a different title just so that you can excel in your anyway. So, but to be able to have that expertise, and an Emmy is something that outside of my industry people understand as media expertise. And I found an amazing project called Red Flags. It follows the journey of a woman after rehab. So where many shows focus on the intervention to rehab, a very Shark Tankian world we live in, right? In the beginning, all the drama in the beginning. But what about like in the messy middle where most of us live, the receiving side of this? And how do we, what are the red flags we can avoid and see, and what they can avoid and see, and what language can we create? And it's a really meaningful project. Sorry, as I go off on a tangent.
No, I think it's great because those are the
Deeply
things
connected to my past, right?
Yeah, but those are the things that make you Vinnie,
Yeah.
okay? And what I like about this conversation is, probably for the first 50 years of my life, I always wanted to be somebody else, whether it was my cousin, the girl next door, the person in the dress shop, whatever.
Mhm.
I wanted her hair, I wanted her body, I wanted every, and I started waking up saying, wait a second, I wonder if anybody wants something about me. And I started listening. And I was amazed once I started listening, because I walked around for almost 50 years. I'm not good enough.
Yeah.
But when I opened up and, like you said, became mindful, it's not like people automatically said, hey, I want to be you, but they make comments about, you've really succeeded in this area. Tell me how you did it. And it'd be like, oh, I have something to share. And I think this world we live in today is very scary because there are so many expectations. And most young people today don't have a chance to sit back and say, who am I? Who do I want to be? How do I get there? They're already being pigeonholed by parents,
Yeah.
You're going to go to school and you're going to get A's and B's, and then you're going to go to college, and maybe you should play football or sports so we get a scholarship to college. And it's like when do you have time to take a breath and know what your talents are?
Yeah. There's I mean, I think education, right? I mean, when we look at a lot of the advances that have happened, just in society in general, we're at an interesting intersection in education, where we're a lot more aware of the institutions that were created to feed into the economy, that was created to feed into the great old American dream. How come it's not an American goal? How come it's it's an American dream? It's not. It's the American dream. Like they don't even want you to have it. It's not even like a goal. It's not the American goal. You can't even touch it. It's never even. It's just. It's not. And what sounds like a nightmare. But this idea of someone else's, and I agree with you on creating the space to explore more of who we are. Look, there's a lot of expectations. There's a lot of constructs. We're also in the middle of, we're not even in the middle, probably at the very beginning of deconstructing the gender constructs that,
Right.
we've been so violently adherent to, which stem from, really dark past, by the way. But I that being said, I think for those reasons, I feel called to even more the reason I feel even more called to keep doing what I'm doing, to make sure that business owners who want to be creative, that can get their stories out there, that have access to characters that haven't been heard, that haven't been seen, can be. I made a joke earlier. There's a lot more platforms than there are new podcasts now. That's a good sign. That's space. That's an opportunity for audiences to build communities.
Absolutely.
And all of those platforms are going to need heroes and icons. They're going to need someone to put on a pedestal to leverage their audience. And I feel like it's a good sign that more is to come. It's funny when I think about what I wanted to be as a kid. I think like Jerry Lewis was honestly like my dream. Like if I could do anything, I thought I wanted to be Jerry. I want to be Jerry Lewis. That was literally my dream. So you can kind of see a little bit, unfortunately, some of that. But that's how I stood out in my family. I had to be that, levity, down with the punchline. And I don't, and some of my family have that like mean sense of humor, like they'll jab, that's not my sense of humor
Yeah.
at all. I'm not even afraid to make a joke and hurt somebody, because I don't even like, I'm so like, I don't know, the empath. The empath. Sometimes I feel like the empath level is high, but that's kind of like having, a thermometer. Like
Yep.
it says that it's hot, but it's not turning on the air conditioning.
I got it. I got it. So I have a question to ask you.
Yeah,
Are you a middle child?
oldest. I'm the
Oldest.
oldest.
See, that's unusual that the oldest child is that entertaining and yeah, I like
Oh
that.
yeah, interesting. Yeah,
Yeah.
I loved media. I was even in my cousins' holiday parties. In fact, my first film was something called The Undone Homework. It was about a young boy who really wanted to do his homework, but there were so many things happening at home. He couldn't focus on doing his homework, and then he tried to get it done at night, but he was dreaming and he couldn't get done his homework. And he tried to do it on the school bus. I even had special effects. He tried to do it on the school bus on the way to school, and he still couldn't do it. So he ended up telling the teacher he needed like 10 minutes timeout to finish his homework, and then she gave it to him. That was the moral story. It's so weird what I'm like. How did my therapist must have loved that. Like, you want to know what I'm going through? Like attention deficit disorder. I could read a little bit quicker and earlier than some of the kids my age. So I would get up in class and read it for them. So I was like, do you know how that comes across? It's
Yeah.
not, I didn't realize that. I'm just trying to be helpful. Let me help you quickly, get there, instead of you do, I could cringe at some of those things that I did. But again, superpowers, coping mechanisms. Turns out I learned to give people the space to talk. That helps a lot as a podcaster, not stepping on people.
Absolutely. Wow. This conversation has been phenomenal. And to our listeners, the beginning of this podcast may sound a little odd because we're not doing a total do-over. But the program that we use to record called Zoom, it zoomed us in a different direction and then it started recording. So you're probably going to miss maybe the first 3-4 minutes. But we'll have Vinnie back on again because there's so many things that you touched on today that I just relate to so directly. When you said that you wanted to be Jerry Lewis as a young kid, my brother, who's in the music industry, he told every Jerry Lewis joke, and he did it in his voice.
Hey, lady,
And
yeah.
you would look at him, and
I
that's
just
who you thought
literally, I
of.
was like, I'm just making sure my like literally making sure my hair is not
Yeah.
sticking up. My Jerry Lewis alfalfa moment.
Well, and I think the funniest part for me is that my brother worked on the Jerry Lewis telethons for many
Oh,
years.
cool. Oh, that
And
would
so
have
he
been a
got to
dream.
know
I
him, and he
watched.
kept saying,
Yeah.
I wanted to be the comedian Jerry Lewis, not the management guy, Jerry Lewis. And
Oh,
I
yeah.
said, but you know what? We all have those different personalities. And
I got to see Jerry Lewis in Damn Yankees a couple of times. And then that's one of the last musicals I ever got to be in. But yeah, he was the space that he created, even down to the fact that he took his comedic skill set and built this system for gratitude and generosity. Like it was like even I not oh you, I didn't even think about that. Like I even that is something that as a child that I saw him make a difference.
absolutely.
And back
Absolutely.
then it was him and like Jim J. Bullock. There weren't a lot of guys that I felt like, I connected with, out there. So thank you for this. Thank you so much. And by
Oh,
the way, if we want to do the opening to this again, we can do it again. Why not? There's second
well,
chances in life.
hey, well, I'm going to invite you back because
All
I have a
right.
bunch of new questions I want to talk to you
All
about.
right.
Um, but tell our listeners exactly how they can find your podcast because I've been listening and I'll tell you, I was going through a tough time the last 3 weeks. My son came home for the holidays, and the second day he was here, he got the flu. He gave it to me. He left and went home with the flu, but then got better right away. My first day of feeling better was yesterday. So 3 weeks. My cough stopped everything yesterday. And it's like, what am I going to do when I'm not feeling good? Well, I'm going to listen to some podcasts. And I'll tell you, it was good medicine. I loved it.
Yeah,
So,
yeah. I unfortunately have a very similar timeline to you and have been going through it, and am glad to finally be off Mucinex DM. What a horrible, like, toxic, just body shock that's been. I appreciate that. My podcast is called I Have a Podcast. It's on ihaveapodcast.com. And this week we just launched another episode with Mandy Moore where we talk about work-life balance. We talk about how to tackle some tough questions and when the power of when to ask questions, to be really honest. And we also have this episode on the radio in a couple of territories nationwide, so which will be just this week. And every once in a while, I find myself taking this episode and I'm really making sure people hear it. It's a special one, and it's this episode that actually made me realize that I might not have a bunch of different guests on my podcast. I might stick to the same 12 people over and over again, almost have a cast as opposed to a guest, because I feel
sure.
like, 20 years of friendship and collaboration with these people, we got plenty to talk about.
Right. Exactly.
So I'm excited for the journey this is
Well,
taking.
it sounds wonderful. And again, it's Vinnie with an IE at the end.
How you doing?
Have a great day, Vinnie. Talk to you soon.
You
Bye-bye
too.
now.
Bye now.